So I wonder what kind of state they were in.
They were probably in a lot worse shape than he was.
Yeah, on the other hand, Joanna Greenwald, is this a murder case? I mean, we're one of the few countries in the world that prosecutes drivers of cars that are engaged in crashes in murder. I mean, clearly he didn't intend to harm anyone.
This is not a murder case. This is something that's more political because you have an officer that died. This case, at best, should have been a DWI, or actually, in their state, they have two different forms of it. They have a DWI, but it's called something different, as well as a per se one, where if your blood alcohol registers above 0.10, then you are charged and you're guilty. That's all that it should have been. What this case is about a horrible, horrible chain of events that you couldn't have even predicted. He had a DWI, and then you had an accident. You had an officer that behaved, I believe, inappropriately so, with not wearing his seatbelt, not seatbelting the man that he's actually bringing down to the police department. And he caused, I believe, the officer caused the accident himself. So this young man, unfortunately, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He did do something absolutely wrong, and that's what he should have been charged with. But never should he have been charged with murder in the second degree. Ever, ever, ever.
Okay.
Am I strong enough?
Tell us how you really feel about it. Joanna, this is why I tell people over and over again, you should just kill that child. God forbid somebody cuts across traffic and you run into that person. No one is going to hear you say, I wasn't really drunk, I only had one drink, I was only a .07. No one's going to want to hear that. You're going to be the drunk driver who caused an injury or who caused death, and you could be looking at, as this young man is, life in prison. I've just seen too many of these cases, and so I tell everybody out there, American law has changed a lot in the last generation, and there are people who are behind bars for 20 years, 30 years, life in prison with no prior criminal records, and they're there saying, it wasn't my fault, I didn't mean it, but juries don't like drunk drivers.
But you used two operative words when you were just speaking. You used that I didn't mean it, and also causation. One, there isn't a causation here. You're an officer who went across lanes to do certain things. So he's not the one that caused this accident. And two, you mentioned I didn't mean it, which means it's an intent crime, which is what he's charged with.
Yeah.
And in this state, part of being charged with murder in the second degree and part of proving this case is malice. Malice is that you need to be able to show some form of intent. And if you've been drinking in New York, I could tell you that's a defense that you were unable psychologically to be able to form the requisite intent for this crime. Therefore, I don't think he's going to be found guilty.
But in a lot of states, it's presumed if you have been drinking, if you drank and you got behind the wheel, it is carelessness, it is reckless disregard, and that's high enough to get you to second-degree murder in some cases. Whether that's right or wrong, that is the law, folks, and that's why I caution everyone. People think I'm crazy when I'm at a party and I'm telling people this. Do not drink even one drink and drive. You just taken too much risk doing that.
Not at all. Not even the least bit. I'm still where I was a few minutes ago.
Well, I mean, take into account what the prosecutor is telling us. The guy's driving 89, 90 miles an hour.
So they say.
Influence of alcohol. So you don't buy that he was going that fast?
Well, the only way that they're showing, the only way that they were telling us that they were going that fast is that they're going to use their own accident reconstructionist who just happens to be working for the state police, who just happens to be, directly on their side. So I don't believe that for a second. And so everything is just because it's from their perspective. And if you're even looking at the manslaughter, you're looking at these things, again, we're looking at two separate, unfortunate, horrible incidents. An accident that I believe was the officer's fault and you just hit upon. No seatbelts. Of course that has an issue. The prosecutor just said, no, it doesn't affect the outcome. We all know that seatbelt saves lives. You have a passenger who I know is going to have a civil action against the state police who's very injured, who was charged with a DWI, and you have the officer who didn't wear a seatbelt. So please don't tell me that this would have been the same outcome.
Okay, well, let me get the Prosecutor Townsend's take on that. First, the accident reconstructionist. He's about that because you've worked with so many criminal defendants. Everyone gets in front of the judge at their sentencing and says, oh, I've learned a lesson and I'm so sorry and it will never happen again. How can we know if that's really true?
Well, in this particular case, this young gentleman, Campbell, he's had a horrific injury himself. He has a colostomy bag. So not only does he psychologically now, will be able to show great remorse, he has a reminder attached to him potentially for the rest of his life. So he's had a life-altering event, not just by the fact that something horrific happened, but it's definitively staying with him. And his body is ever changed, as is his mind.
Yeah. You know, you just have to think, how can we prevent these kinds of crimes? How can we prevent these kinds of tragedies? And we're going to have a guest joining us a little bit later on in the program to talk about a terrific product that I think could really save lives. So stay tuned. Other police officers who arrived at the scene, never having any idea that she was about to witness the death of her fellow officer, Officer Davis. Let me bring Joanna Greenwald back in. You've been such a fiery advocate for the defense today. We love it. Let's talk about breathalyzer tests. We're going to have a guest on in just a couple of minutes to talk about people who voluntarily put breathalyzers in their car, which I think is a very interesting approach. But when the police give somebody a breathalyzer, you know, we just assume that those tests are correct and accurate. Somebody gets breathalyzed at the scene, they blow a .08, they blow a 1 or a 1.5. We assume it's accurate, but the defense actually has a lot of arguments to make in drunk driving cases about those tests, don't they?
Yes, I think maybe that's the royal we assume that they're accurate.
Right.
We do not assume they're accurate at all. With cases such as that, especially in New York, you always ask the prosecution, the DA's office, we want calibration, we want to know that, in fact, that this machine has been tested and is in working order. So, no, we do not believe that they're always working correctly.
You know, Joanna, I think it was Mark Twain who said the only people who should say we are royalty and people with tapeworms. I meant we.
Wait a minute.
I
hope I don't have tapeworms. And I'm not royalty.
I don't think I have tapeworms. Definitely not royalty.
And called a princess.
There you go. There you go. So, but I think that, you know, the average public, we think, well, it's a scientific instrument,
right?
And it measures your breath and it measures the alcohol in your blood, open
right.
and shut. But there's also issues of people's blood alcohol rising or falling over time and dependent upon the food they have eaten that night.
And their
right?
body mass.
Right.
Their body mass, their metabolism. This is really, there's so much science behind all of this. It's not just the fact that you can blow a certain amount. There's so much that goes to it forensically, such as your metabolism, your age, your weight, what you ate that day, your sex. There's just what medications you might be on. And I'm very interested to know is that the officer who we've just heard was taking 2 different medications, was he given a test as well to see if there was anything else in his system?
Yeah, and Joanna, I'm glad you brought that up because the defense attorney in this case argues that one of the medications that the police officer was taking was Depakote, and it was an anti-epilepsy drug. And the defense attorney went so far to say in his opening statement, this officer should not have been driving. Now, I thought that was perhaps taking it a little too far.
But sometimes that is an argument, especially as far as just like getting behind the wheel when you were just saying as someone drinking. If you know that there's a potential that you could have an epileptic seizure and you are someone that has a gun on you and you're someone that's in charge of other people, then I think I would look at that actually a little more close than I would as far as a different type of person.
So bigger question, Joanna, how much are you going to go after the police officer in this case? Because after all, he is the victim. He lost his life. He was out there trying to protect all of us from drunk drivers in the middle of the night. You got to do it carefully at least, don't you?
You have to do it tenderly and carefully because at the end of the day, you have a loss of life. There are no winners in this case. I just want that out there. There's no winners. There's suffering, there's death, and life-changing events that no one will ever forget, even for the officers who were not injured in this case. You could see that they are traumatized by this situation. So there are no winners, but if you want to ask me from a scale of 1 to 10, just like Spinal Tap said, I'd like to turn it to 11, I'd be at 11.
Wow, really? All right.
I would.
Well, do the charges fit the crime in this case? When we come back, we'll hear what you had to say about that. As we around this one, I think the gloves and the fingernail clippers are a little suspicious.
But they got them, I think, inappropriately so. He wasn't a suspect at the time. And from my understanding, they took them, but they didn't return them. So I think that was an illegal search that they had, and I think that should have been suppressed.
Okay, fair enough, and that's a good argument, and you're such a terrific defense attorney. If I get in trouble, I'm calling you.
I'm here.
But if it comes into this case, why is the guy, a 19-year-old boy's carrying around white gloves, and it's got the victim's blood on the gloves? We got the victim's non-blood DNA
You
on
heard
the
he was
fingernail
going to
clippers?
pantomime. He was going to pantomime. He has his reasons. He was going to pantomime. Whether or not any of us believe that, that's a whole other question. There's no reason why you should have it, and again, his reason is that he had a show he was going to do, and somehow his hands must have been cold when he was out jogging going to find his keys. I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to need to hear more about those gloves, and maybe the defense is going to give us something in this trial about the gloves. Gene, tell us more about this defendant. As you say, he was a youth pastor, he is well loved, and a lot of church members are going to be showing up to support him.
That's right. He was 19 when this happened. He's 21 now. He's a member of the Zion Pentecostal Church here in Tampa, Florida, and that's where he was the commander of the Royal Rangers. And I've done some research on the Royal Rangers. What are they? Well, they are a youth group, I believe, of young boys, sort of like the Boy Scouts, but it's a religious vein. Everything is based on the Bible, and they work toward medals and honors. And furthermore, Joshua Rosa in high school was very revered as a member of the ROTC. He was attending community college when this happened. He was also working at the Sports Authority.
Dr. Sheinberg, does this sound like a sexual assault to you?
It certainly does. Whether